Hey, welcome back. My name is Ed. Today we're going to be talking about injectors. What I'm talking about is going to apply to not just my Sentra SER Spec V, but a lot of this is going to apply to any other vehicle you got. So there's going to be a lot of information in this video, but I am going to simplify the technical stuff just so a way that you can understand it. And then if you want to learn more, there's plenty of videos on injectors. So what is an injector? It injects fuel into the engine. That's all it does. It's a pretty simple device, but it's also very complex at the same time. How the injector works, there's basically like a little plunger in there that's held up by a spring. When you send electric current through it, it opens it up, lets the fuel out, and then the ECU tells it to turn off, and it turns off. They're not in essence like a variable speed or anything like that because it's not an actual pump. It's just limiting how much fuel that comes through here that spits out through there. Should you upgrade your injectors? For most people, no. Should you replace them when they're not working? Yes. Should you clean them once in a while? Probably yes. So I'm going to go in a little more detail on when you would want to upgrade your injectors and when you're better off not upgrading your injectors. Because most people don't need to upgrade their injectors. So the most common part that people see in injectors is your CCs. How many CCs is this injector? These are probably somewhere around 300, maybe 280. I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. These are stock injectors from Sentra SER. And then you can replace these with things like 550cc injectors, 440cc injectors, 1200cc injectors. Here's the thing with that. We're talking about naturally aspirated, nothing too crazy done to the engine, just basic bolt-ons. You typically want an injector to be somewhere between like 80 to 90% duty cycle. So what is duty cycle? How much fuel it can spit out before it is maxed out. So let's say your build requires 400 cc's of fuel and you put a 300 cc injector in there. Well, now you're not going to give your engine enough fuel. You're going to be starving your engine of fuel because it's maxed out its duty cycle. Its duty cycle will now be at 100%. The other thing that happens is, let's say you running regular pump gas and you just have bolt-ons and you put 1000 cc injectors on there. What happens then? First, your tune calculations are going to be way off, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. But also, when the bigger injector you go, you're going to be lower on your duty cycle. So let's say you're running like a 30% duty cycle. You're only using 30% of what this injector can actually do. The problem with that is you have your scale, right? Let's say 0 to 100% duty cycle. Well, now you're crimping down your scale to 0 to 30. Here's a way you can think about it. Let's say you need to fill a cup up precisely with the exact amount of liquid. So you got a little hose here, and you can send your liquid through here, and then it'll stop, when you need it to stop, and you're good. Now pretend this is a bigger injector. You got a lot more fuel coming out, so it's a lot harder to stop it exactly when you need to, especially when you're filling up like a small little cup. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of like the way I like to think about it. When you're changing your injectors out, let's say you're going turbo, a couple things to look for on the injectors is, one is you need to match the injector versus how much power you're trying to put through your engine. There is calculators to help you determine that. There's a couple other terms that you're going to hear about these. You're going to hear a term called dwell time. And basically what that is the time that it takes for the computer to tell the injector to open for it to actually open. The dwell time can be adjusted with the computer if you have a dwell time number for your injector. When you're getting like those cheap $30 eBay injectors, chances are you're not going to get an accurate dwell time number off of that. So your injector may not be firing at the exact millisecond that you want it to. Another common term you're going to hear is something called pulse width, but that's basically just the time for your injector to open up and to close back up. Again, those are kind of simplified, but Here's the thing is when you change an injector on the engine, your car is calibrated for the stock injector. So you need to tune the car for your particular injector you're using. So you can do that with your tuning software. In my case, it's UpRev. I can go in, change the K multiplier, and there's a calculator you can go on, type in what size injector, what size MAF, and it tells you what your new K value number is compared to what the factory one is. And that will really help you get you in the ballpark of where you need to be for the base calibration. The K multiplier is just a starting point. It's not, that's all you do. There's more to it than that. Let's touch on the different brands of injectors, in particular for the Nissan Sentra SENTRA SPECV. Naturally aspirated, stick with OEM. Turbocharged, that's when you're going to be looking at upgrading. Old school common upgraded injector was going to be the 440cc injectors, the Subaru injectors. They're pretty much direct plug and play. They work, but they are an older injector. The spray patterns on the injectors aren't as good. It doesn't atomize the fuel as nicely. So the injector to upgrade from the Subaru injectors, next step up is going to be your Bosch 550cc. So you'll have your Bosch 550cc, and then these require pigtails to be changed on your injector harness to work. They have better atomization, a little bit bigger, so you get a little bit more headroom there. Then next up from the 550cc, they have a 650cc, which is a modified version of the 550cc. And it's not aftermarket modified, it's modified by the manufacturer. Low boost, low horsepower, let's say, 300, 320 at the most. 550cc's are great. But if you're going above like the 320 horsepower to, 400 horsepower, 500 horsepower, then you really need to start going with bigger injectors. So 650cc's are great injectors for pump gas, but you basically want to get the smallest injector you can that will feed enough fuel for the vehicle. So that's kind of the goal there, is not to shove a bunch of fuel that's not needed. The goal is to match the fuel correctly. Okay, let's try to give you an actual example here. Stock and fuel injectors, we're just going to put 300. Aftermarket, we're going to put 550. Ethanol, where I fill up, I'm using 10% ethanol. MAF housing, your factory K multiplier is 26,000. That's what it's basing all your fuel calculations on. So if you just put bigger injectors on, it's not going to be calculating correct because it's going to be using this number. When in the tune, you need to put this number, the 16,000. So that's a pretty good difference between the two. Now, what I just showed you there is not tuning software. That is basically just a calculator for your tuning software. Basically, all you truly need to know is if you change your injector size, you need to tune the car. And you don't want to put a bigger injector than what you actually need. Now, you don't want to go, too much above 90% duty cycle. If you're running like 98% duty cycle, there's not a whole lot of headroom there. You don't want to do that. You definitely need to go with a bigger injector if you're hitting that. So one of the things I forgot to mention while I was filming is matching flow rates between injectors. There's companies, I think FIC, Fuel Injector Clinic, you can buy injectors that are matched on the flow rate. So they test them and then they group them together. Because out of the box, each injector is not going to be exact. So there could be a 5 to 10% variance between, one injector to another. OEM injectors do have variances too when you buy them. They're not going to be all exactly equal. But there's companies out there that test them and then group them so you can buy 4 injectors that are all within, let's say 2 to 3% of each other. So definitely highly recommend going that route if you can. But anyway, thank you for watching. Aloha. Peace out. Catch you on the next one.